This is Jenna Bulow, recording for the Bellwether Museum vaults. The following object has no verified provenance. Accession number BMV-UH031. The object is a candlestick telephone of uncertain manufacture, dated approximately 1915 to 1920. Black enamel over brass. Nickel-plated receiver hook. Separate earpiece. Fixed transmitter cup. The original wiring has been removed along with nearly all internal components. The underside of the base has been filed smooth. No serial number or manufacturer's marks remain. A small brass plate has been attached to the front of the stem. The inscription reads, "Nightline. Do not answer after 2:13. The telephone entered the Bellwether Museum collection in 1978 as part of an estate donation from the family of Dr. Lionel Avery. The donation consisted primarily of medical instruments, correspondence, local histories, and several boxes of personal records. The telephone was discovered inside a sealed wooden crate that did not appear on the estate inventory. Also contained in the crate was a 31-page typewritten statement attributed to Margaret Louise Bell, formerly of Calder County. The document is dated October 3rd, 1928. It is unclear whether this is the date of composition or the date of the events described. The statement begins as follows. My name is Margaret Louise Bell. I am 37 years old. For 9 years, I was employed as the overnight operator at the Calder County Telephone Exchange. I left that position on the morning of September 17th of this year and have no intention of returning to it. I have been advised against writing this statement. Sheriff Danner believes the events of the past several nights were caused by fatigue, lightning damage, and hysteria among several residents of Calder. Representatives of the Calder Telephone Company have asked that I make no public allegations concerning the safety of the exchange. Dr. Avery has suggested that I record everything I remember, although he has also warned me that creating a permanent account may carry risks of its own. I do not know whether his concern is reasonable. I no longer trust my own judgment in such matters. I have chosen to write this because 3 people remain missing. I do not believe they left Calder voluntarily. I do not believe they were taken by any person presently living. I believe their disappearances were connected to an inactive telephone circuit formerly serving the abandoned mining settlement of Marrow Glen. I further believe that the circuit was not carrying a telephone call in any ordinary sense. The Calder Exchange occupied the 2nd floor of the Calder Mercantile Building on Mercer Street. The room was rectangular, narrow, and poorly ventilated. The switchboard stood against the southern wall. 3 windows faced the courthouse and the railway hotel. During the day, 2 operators shared the board. The night shift was ordinarily handled by 1 person. I began work each evening at 9 and remained until 6 the following morning. Most people imagine an overnight telephone exchange to be a place of emergencies. It was not. Emergencies occurred, but most calls were ordinary. Requests for physicians, messages to the railway station, wives attempting to locate husbands, farm owners asking whether a storm had damaged lines further south. After midnight, the board usually became quiet. I was accustomed to silence. I was accustomed to electrical faults, crossed wires, static, water in the line, damaged connections, and calls in which the speaker could not be understood. I mention this because I do not want what follows to be dismissed as the confusion of an inexperienced operator. I knew the board. I knew the lines. I knew the sounds they made when damaged. The line marked 113 did not make any of those sounds. Line 113 had once served Marrow Glen. Marrow Glen was a small mining settlement approximately 22 miles north of Calder, beyond the Blackwater River and Barlow Ridge. The settlement had been established by the Dyer Consolidated Mining Company and abandoned after a collapse in June of 1917. The telephone line had been disconnected shortly afterward. According to exchange diagrams, the northern cable had been physically severed approximately 18 miles from Calder. The local portion of the wire remained in place, but it did not connect to an active station. No subscriber was assigned to the number. No call should have been capable of reaching it. Every operator who worked the Calder board knew this. Line 113 was sometimes used when training new staff because it was safe to insert a plug without disturbing a subscriber. The indicator had not illuminated in my presence during the 9 years I worked there. On Friday, September 14th, heavy rain passed through Calder County. The weather worsened shortly before midnight. Wind damaged several poles west of the town, and the Harrison Farm circuit failed at approximately 12:27. At 12:53, the railway station reported that a section of track near milepost 9 had partially washed out. These events were inconvenient, but not unusual. I recorded them in the exchange ledger and continued monitoring the board. At 1:14 in the morning, the indicator beneath line 113 illuminated. My first assumption was that the storm had caused a false signal. I removed the plug, cleaned it, and checked the adjacent circuits. The light remained steady. I waited approximately 30 seconds before answering. When the connection opened, I heard several people breathing near the transmitter. There was no immediate speech. The breathing did not resemble line interference. It was uneven. One person appeared to be very close to the mouthpiece. At least 2 others were further away. Eventually, a woman asked whether she had reached Calder. I confirmed that she had. She then asked whether the morning train had arrived. I informed her that it was shortly after 1 in the morning and that the next passenger train was not due until 7:40. There was a silence of several seconds. Someone in the background began to cry. The woman covered the transmitter and spoke to the others. I could not understand everything she said, but I distinctly heard the words, "It hasn't come yet." When she returned to the telephone, she did not request a connection. Instead, she warned me not to answer if the line illuminated again. The call then ended. I recorded the time and number in the ledger. Under remarks, I wrote, "False connection, female caller, cause unknown." I did not initially consider the event dangerous. My working explanation was that the storm damage had crossed the inactive circuit with another line. This happens less frequently than the public supposes, but it does happen. A caller may believe they have reached one location when the wires have temporarily joined elsewhere. What troubled me was the woman's question about the train. There was fear in her voice before I answered. My response appeared to relieve her. I contacted the railway station and asked whether any work crew had traveled north of Blackwater. The dispatcher informed me that the road had flooded before dark and that no crew was operating near Barlow Ridge. I asked whether anyone still lived at Marrow Glen. He said the settlement had been empty for years. His exact description was that only several chimneys and the mine opening remained. At 1:38, line 113 illuminated again. I considered the earlier warning. Nevertheless, I answered. Telephone operators are not permitted to ignore active indicators, especially during severe weather. The second caller was a child. I believed he was a boy, although the connection was poor and I cannot be certain. The boy addressed me as Miss Bell. I had not given my name during the first call. It is possible that he knew the exchange staff. Calder is a small town, and my employment was not secret. Even so, the use of my name caused me to believe the call was deliberate rather than the result of crossed wiring. The boy said that his mother wanted me to listen. I heard a scraping sound in the background. It resembled a wooden table or cabinet being dragged across the floor. After several seconds, I heard a train whistle. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. It was lower than the whistles used by the Calder passenger line. It continued longer and seemed to descend in pitch rather than ending cleanly. I told the boy that I could hear it. He became distressed. The scraping behind him stopped, and a door opened. Several people began speaking at once. I could not distinguish the words. The final statement I heard clearly was made by the boy. He said, "It heard you." The connection then failed. I remained seated at the board for several minutes. The railway yard was located east of Mercer Street. It was possible that the whistle had originated there and carried strangely through the storm. I contacted the station again and asked whether an engine had moved. None had. The dispatcher was irritated by my questions. I did not tell him what the child had said. At 1:52, I retrieved the old service diagrams from the records cabinet. The Marrow Glen circuit was shown as a single route running north from Calder through Harrison Farm, across the Blackwater Crossing and over Barlow Ridge. Beside Marrow Glen, someone had drawn a small X in red pencil. The mark did not appear to be part of the original diagram. A handwritten notation beside the circuit stated that the line had been severed on June 9, 1917. The mine collapse had occurred the previous evening. At 2 o'clock, the courthouse clock began to strike. During the second chime, line 113 illuminated again. Before I could respond, another indicator lit. This one belonged to the Calder Hotel. A third followed, belonging to Dr. Lionel Avery's residence. Then St. Michael's Church, then the funeral home, then the railway station. Within several seconds, 12 indicators were active. I answered the hotel line first. There was no caller. I heard only the repetitive sound of wheels passing over rail joints. I disconnected and answered Dr. Avery's line. The same sound was present. It continued at an identical speed and volume, as though each telephone had been connected to the same moving train. On the church line, I heard singing beneath the wheels. I could not identify the hymn. The voices were out of time with one another. Each singer seemed to trail slightly behind the rest. I found the sound physically unpleasant and removed the plug almost immediately. One by one, the indicators went dark. But line 113 remained active. The clock above the board read 2:13. With no other option, I answered. The first woman had returned. The connection was clearer than before. Her voice sounded close enough that I briefly looked behind me. She identified herself as Alice Vane. She stated that she was calling from Marrow Glen. I asked her what year it was. She answered 1917 without hesitation. I then asked for the date, and she said June 8th. I did not believe she was pretending. I did not know how to explain that certainty. Her fear was immediate and practical. She did not sound like someone telling a ghost story or playing a joke. She sounded like a person reporting an emergency while trying not to be overheard. I opened the Marrow Glen service file while she remained connected. The documents confirm that a collapse occurred shortly before midnight on June 8, 1917. The main shaft suffered additional damage the following morning. 26 deaths were officially recorded. The telephone line failed at 12:32. No call was successfully received from Marrow Glen after that time. I asked Alice Vane whether she and the others were trapped by the collapse. She told me that the collapse was not the immediate danger. She was afraid of the train. At first, I believed she meant an actual locomotive. Marrow Glen had a narrow industrial railway used to transport coal from the mine. I asked whether there had been an accident on the tracks. She denied this. Her exact words were, "You keep asking as though it hasn't happened yet." I did not understand her meaning. She then described events that had begun several weeks before the collapse. Miners working in the lower levels had reported hearing machinery beneath them. The sound resembled wheels moving over track, although no tunnel or railway existed below the mine. The mine superintendent dismissed the reports as settling rock. 3 workers had subsequently disappeared. Their tools and lamps were recovered in a lower passage. The men themselves were not. On the night of June 8th, lights were seen moving through the coal beneath the main shaft. Alice described these as a row of pale windows. She claimed figures could be seen standing behind them. Before she could explain further, another person took the telephone from her. The speaker was a man. He instructed me to break the connection and prevent the sound from reaching Calder. I asked him to explain what he meant. The train whistle sounded again. This time, I did not hear it through the receiver alone. The window of the exchange room vibrated. The floor moved beneath my chair. I felt the sound in the building. The man on the line became frantic. The final sentence I understood was, "Do not let it hear the town." The connection then filled with noise. Every indicator on the switchboard illuminated at once. The Calder Exchange served 216 active subscribers. All 216 lines became active. Every signal lamp burning at full brightness. The bells began ringing simultaneously. I attempted to disconnect line 113, but removing the plug had no effect. I began pulling cords from the board at random. The signals remained active. Telephones throughout Calder started ringing. I could hear them through the open exchange windows. The hotel telephone rang, the pharmacy telephone, the courthouse, fire station, funeral home, railway office, church, and private residences all rang at the same time. Residents began answering. And as each receiver was lifted, the corresponding signal on my board extinguished. The calls no longer appeared to be passing through the exchange. The board had become a display of connections rather than the means by which those connections were made. Voices emerged from my headset while it lay on the desk. Some belonged to the residents of Calder. I heard Dr. Avery repeatedly asking who was calling. I heard a hotel guest shouting for the operator. I heard a woman praying. Other voices were unfamiliar. Some were speaking from Marrow Glen. Others appeared to be announcing destinations. I hesitate to describe the voice making those announcements. It was male, but it did not sound as though it was produced by a single throat. The station names were mostly unfamiliar. Several did not resemble English words. Some contained sounds I could not have repeated even immediately afterward. The final destination announced was Calder. At that moment, the rain outside stopped falling. The storm did not end, but the drops remained suspended in the air. I could see them hanging beyond the windows in the light from the hotel and pharmacy. People stood in Mercer Street holding telephone receivers or looking north. None of them moved. The courthouse clock stopped at 2:14. A pale light appeared at the northern end of Mercer Street. There were no visible tracks beneath it. It approached slowly between the buildings. The light did not cast shadows. I climbed onto a chair and opened the junction box on the northern wall of the exchange. The Marrow Glen circuit was wrapped in red cloth. I recognized it from the service diagram. The cable was trembling, and when I touched it, it was warm. Something knocked from inside the wall. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 more. The sound moved through the plaster towards the switchboard. In a panic, I climbed down and took the fire axe from its bracket. But before I could use it, the telephone attached to line 113's testing circuit rang. The telephone was not part of the public board. It was an older candlestick model used by operators and repair staff. I had never heard it ring before. The signal followed the emergency interruption pattern. 1 ring, 2 rings, 1 ring. I answered. Dr. Lionel Avery was on the line. His residence was 3 streets from the exchange. He told me that several figures were standing outside his home. He described them as railway employees, although he could not see their faces clearly. He believed the telephone system itself had become dangerous. He instructed me to destroy the testing telephone and, if necessary, the entire switchboard. I asked whether doing so would harm the people who had answered their telephones. He said he did not know. I appreciated his honesty. I lifted the axe, and at that moment, the door to the exchange room opened. A man stood in the hallway. I will record what I remember, although parts of this memory have changed each time I revisit it. The man wore the uniform of a railway conductor. His coat was wet. Water ran from the fabric and gathered on the floor, although the hallway behind him was dry. He was unusually thin, and his face was pale. I cannot clearly remember his eyes. Whenever I attempt to picture them, I instead remember 2 small rectangles of light. I have dreamed of looking through those openings and seeing rows of passengers moving past behind them. This may be an invention of memory. I hope it is. The man addressed me by my full name. He appeared to be holding a punched railway ticket. He said, Your connection is ready. I struck the switchboard with the axe. The bells grew louder. The man bent at the waist as though the blow had struck him rather than the board. I struck it again. The hallway behind him changed. It became longer than the building permitted. The staircase and neighboring office disappeared. In their place was the interior of a railway carriage. Lamps moved overhead. Rows of passengers sat on either side. Some wore miners' clothing. Some wore night clothes. Some appeared injured. Several were covered in dirt or white burial cloth. None of them looked directly at me. Near the far end of the carriage, I saw a woman holding the hand of a young boy. I believe this was Alice Vane. She pointed towards the board. I do not remember hearing her voice through the room. I heard it through the receiver. She told me to break the line. The conductor stepped forward, but I did not give him any more time. I struck the switchboard a third time. The axe passed through the front panel and severed the red-wrapped cable. At once, the signal lamps extinguished. The bells stopped. The suspended rain fell. The hallway returned to its proper size. The conductor disappeared. I lost my balance and struck the filing cabinet. I may have been unconscious for several minutes, although the courthouse clock still read 2:14 when I stood. Residents remained in Mercer Street. Many appeared confused. Several claimed not to remember leaving their homes. The telephones had stopped ringing. Dr. Avery was still connected through the damaged testing telephone. I told him I'd cut the Marrow Glen circuit. He answered that I had not cut it, I had only closed it. When I asked what the difference was, he said, "A door can be opened." The call ended. The exchange remained closed for the next 2 days. Company investigators attributed the damage to a lightning surge and my use of the fire axe. They could not explain why every telephone in town had rung. 47 residents reported hearing a train between 2:13 and 2:14. No train passed through Calder at that time. There are no tracks on Mercer Street. 3 residents disappeared during the incident. Their names were Arthur Pell, Maud Grayson, and Clara Webb. Each had answered a telephone shortly before vanishing. No doors or windows had been forced. Their clothing and personal belongings remained in their homes. In each residence, muddy footprints began beside the telephone. The footprints continued to the nearest wall. They did not turn or stop. They ended at the plaster. Dr. Avery examined the exchange the following morning. He removed the candlestick testing telephone that had been attached to the Marrow Glen circuit. He told me that its internal wiring was damaged beyond ordinary repair. Nevertheless, he believed it remained connected to something. I gave him permission to take it and resigned that afternoon. For 2 nights, I heard nothing unusual. At 2:10 in the morning, on September 17th, Dr. Avery telephoned my home. He informed me that the candlestick telephone had rung at 2:13 on each of the previous nights. He had not answered. He had removed the receiver. The telephone continued ringing. He said he cut the external cord. Still, it continued. He then placed it in a locked cabinet in his cellar. On the 3rd night, the telephone did not ring at 2:13. Instead, Several glass objects in his house began to vibrate. He said he thought he heard a train beneath the floorboards. He believed the connection was changing. During our conversation, I heard a telephone bell in the room behind him. At the same time, a ringing sound began inside the wall of my own home. I was already holding my telephone receiver, and there was no second telephone in the house. The wallpaper beside me darkened. A narrow rectangular outline appeared in the plaster. Light showed around the edges. The outline resembled a door. Someone knocked from the other side. One knock. Two knocks. One knock. I left the house without gathering clothes or money. I remained at a boarding house until sunrise. When I returned, the outline was still visible. The wall was dry and solid. There was no cavity behind it. No carpenter could explain the discoloration. The mark remained for 6 months. I left Calder County the following January. Before my departure, Dr. Avery showed me the candlestick telephone once more. He had removed most of its components. He believed that leaving the telephone intact made it easier for the connection to use. The bell mechanism was gone. The wiring was gone. The induction coil and terminals were gone. The instrument should have been incapable of producing sound. He attached a brass plate to the stem. It read, "Nightline. Do not answer after 2:13. I told him this warning would not stop anyone who was curious. He said the plate was intended less as a warning than a test. Anyone who answered after reading it could not claim ignorance. I found this remark cruel. He later apologized. Dr. Avery continued investigating Marrow Glen. He located newspaper reports, railway records, church accounts, and several statements from former mine workers. The incidents did not begin with the 1917 collapse. Miners had reported hearing underground bells as early as 1902. In 1908, a blasting crew uncovered a section of metal embedded in a coal wall. The metal resembled the side of a railway carriage, though no hollow space was found behind it. The surface was, reportedly, warm. Workers could hear people speaking on the other side. The mine superintendent ordered the passage sealed. In 1913, 2 miners vanished from a lower tunnel. Their lamps were discovered beside a line of parallel grooves in the floor. The grooves ended at solid stone. In the weeks before the collapse, several residents of Marrow Glen received telephone calls from missing workers. The callers asked whether the morning train had arrived. No record of these calls was preserved by the Calder Exchange. Dr. Avery believed the thing beneath Marrow Glen has never been in a train. It had adopted the appearance and behavior of one because trains were understood as a means of passage. It later used telephone lines for the same reason. Railways joined places. Telephones joined voices. It required a connection, and once a connection was made, it attempted to establish a destination. Dr. Avery and I corresponded for several years. His letters became increasingly difficult to understand. He reported that the candlestick telephone no longer rang only at night. It sometimes rang during the day. Sometimes the sound came from another room while the telephone remained locked in the cellar. On one occasion, every telephone in the Calder Historical Society rang while the object was being discussed at a board meeting. On another, a church bell rang at 2:13 despite having been removed for repairs. Dr. Avery came to believe that physical wires were no longer necessary. He wrote that hearing the story of the Marrow Glen line might itself create a weak connection. Speaking a name might strengthen it. Repeating particular phrases might serve the same purpose as answering a telephone. I do not know whether I believe this. If it's true, I may have made a grave error by writing this statement. His final letter reached me in December of 1936. It contained only one page. The telephone had stopped ringing in his home. He considered this more alarming than the previous activity. The final line read, "I believe the warning plate has become an invitation." I received no further correspondence. I later learned that Dr. Avery's house was found empty in March of 1937. There was no sign of forced entry. The cellar cabinet stood open. The telephone was gone. Muddy footprints covered the floor. The footprints were numerous enough that investigators could not determine how many people had passed through the room. All of them led toward the northern wall. None led away. I've written the statement because I heard the train again last night. I now live more than 400 miles from Calder. There are no railway tracks near my home. At 2:13 in the morning, I awoke to the sound of wheels beneath my bed. I remained still. The sound continued for approximately 1 minute. When it stopped, I turned on the lamp. A punched railway ticket lay on the floor. My full name had been written across it. Beneath my name was a destination. I will not record the destination. I burned the ticket in the kitchen stove. At 7 this morning, I found it lying on my pillow. I have now placed it inside an envelope and sealed it with wax. I do not expect this to contain it. The telephone must never be connected to an active line. It must never be stored near another telephone. The receiver and base should be kept separately. If it rings at 2:13, do not answer. If it rings at another hour, leave the building. If you hear a train whistle, do not attempt to locate the source. If a door appears where no door previously existed, do not touch it. Do not knock. If someone behind the door uses your name, remain silent. I believe a voice can function as a wire. I believe attention and memory can function as wires. Once it knows where you are, it will attempt to complete the connection. My name is Margaret Louise Bell. I was the night operator for the Calder County Exchange. I answered the Marrow Glen line. I should not have answered. That concludes the statement. A handwritten note appears on the reverse side of the final page. The handwriting does not match Margaret Bell's signature or Dr. Avery's surviving correspondence. It reads, "She did not burn the ticket." No railway ticket was included in the estate donation. No envelope matching the one described in the statement has been located. The Calder County Telephone Company ceased operation in 1954. Most surviving business records were destroyed during a courthouse fire in 1962. The museum has confirmed the existence of Margaret Louise Bell through a 1927 Calder City directory. Her occupation is listed as telephone operator. No death certificate has been found. Dr. Lionel Avery appears in county medical records from 1911 to 1936. His residence was formally declared abandoned in 1939. The Marrow Glen mine collapse did occur on June 8, 1917. Official records list 26 fatalities. A surviving newspaper article names Alice Vane and her son Thomas Vane among the missing. The telephone was examined by bellwether conservators shortly after its accession in 1978. The internal components have been removed before the object arrived. There is no bell, there is no active wiring. The receiver is not connected to the transmitter or base. Effectively, the instrument cannot function as a telephone. Despite this, staff have reported hearing it ring on 4 documented occasions: October 12, 1981, June 8, 1994, September 17, 2007, and March 3, 2019. Each incident occurred at 2:13 in the morning. During the 2019 incident, the telephone was under security observation in Vault Room C. The camera recording contains no audible ringing. At 2:13, all 3 members of the overnight security team turned towards the northern wall. One guard approached the telephone. A second guard restrained him before he could lift the receiver. The third guard opened the vault door and left the room. None of the guards remembered the event afterward. The telephone is currently stored in a sound-insulated cabinet. Its receiver is kept separately in Vault Room F. The catalog contains one additional instruction. It is unsigned. The instruction reads, "Distance between the components is irrelevant." End recording. Thank you for listening to No Verified Provenance. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find the podcast on YouTube and Spotify by searching No Verified Provenance. You can also follow on Instagram at Jenna Sequoia. That's jenna.sais.quoii. Follow for episode updates, artwork, teasers, and other things that probably should have stayed in the Bellwether Museum vaults. If you'd like to support the show, consider following, subscribing, leaving a rating, or sharing the podcast with someone who enjoys stories about things best left undocumented. Until next time, this is Jenna Bulow, signing off from the Bellwether Museum vaults. And remember, be careful what you bring home.